Good afternoon. I'm Jim Wilbanks from the Department of Military History at the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College. I'd like to welcome you to the 9th in our series of 10 lectures on military history of the Cold War. And our presenter today is John Suprin. John is a professor in our department, and he has a bachelor's from the University of Massachusetts and a master's from the University of Washington in Seattle. And he'll be talking to you about the 73 War and its impact on the development of U.S. Army doctrine.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon. I don't know if the volume in this is going to overwhelm us or not, but the title for today is the Yom Kippur War of 1973 and its impact on U.S. military doctrine. If you peel the two apart, and you came here, if you bought the ticket for the long Yom Kippur War history, we're not going to be able to do that because the Trail of Tears here from the one to the other, the end of the development of doctrine that we're going to talk about today is about 1982, and the story starts about 1972. So we've got about 10 years of exciting events to cover. Some of those are physical events, some of them are strategic events, some of them are intellectual events. And we've also got some personalities to cover. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to race in a measured way through the material that I think we need to cover so you get the narrative of what's going on. And then hopefully there'll be a little bit of time fenced at the end so we have time for some questions and answers. So let me begin. Does anybody have a good answer for this question that when they came and there was a military doctrine piece? What's your definition of military doctrine? Sir?
When do we go to war?
Okay, when do we go to war? Any others?
Don't repeat the mistakes of the past.
Okay, there's an action part of this. Doctrine combines theory with practice, and so doctrine is normally telling you kind of how to approach something or how to do something. So problem already identified, and then an objective already identified. Now, how do you get from the one to the other? So it's usually a procedural piece, and I'll throw up a working definition here. And this is a Janowitz quote, but I thought it was a pretty good one. Military doctrine is the logic of a soldier's professional behavior. So, thanks, boss. So how do you get where you're trying to go? So here's some background. Starting at the end of the Vietnam War and the end of the U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War, the Army inherited or was given a plethora of problems to solve simultaneously. It had spent about 10 years primarily doing Southeast Asia, and during that period, the life force of the Army was sucked in that direction. As you are probably aware, during that period, the Army had selective service had a draft component to it. As a matter of fact, the majority of the Army was drafted. And then by the end of the war, actually in 1973, so the year after we left, Congress took away the president's authority to conscript. So the draft effectively stopped in 1973. What that gave the Army was now whither forward. Where do we go? Where do we get the people from to go there? And how do we approach whatever our tasks are for the future? So among the tasks the Army is working on at the same time, if you take a look at what's up here on the slide, is anyone aware of the serious problems the Army was experiencing around 1972-73? You don't count. Ma'am? And this is a central part of it. Once you go to a volunteer force, if the organization, if the institution of the Army is unpopular, where do you get your volunteers from if nobody wants to go to it? So there's a period of time where what you have is the residuals of the draft, people who are drafted in and decide to stay a little bit longer. But really the ability to reprocess the personnel of the Army with true volunteers, people who really wanted to come in, is going to take a considerable amount of time. And part of it is due to the attitude of the American people. They're tired of war. They blame the Army for a lot of what happened, and so the ability to recruit is limited. The Army also hasn't really been skillful at recruiting because it didn't have to be. So during the Vietnam War, because you're getting people as a result of the draft, you don't really have to be full of good ideas about how to recruit because they show up automatically. Well, then when the draft ends, how do you appeal to young people to come in? How do you appeal to the professionals to stay? And the pay scale, of course, is another thing. The pay scale isn't glorious. And so if you're looking to do it to kind of feed your family, there's a question there as to whether you actually will be able to do that. So the All-Volunteer Force is established in 1973, and the strategic effort is refocused on Central Europe. For those that have been to several of these presentations in the past, the Cold War presentations, does anybody remember the importance of Central Europe in this whole Cold War paradigm? Yeah, why are we focused on Central Europe? Okay, I'll bite. Okay, and the significance of Germany?
I'm trying to remember that somehow the Soviet Union, they got East Germany and some other places in an agreement, except for even though we agreed we didn't want to, some kind of deal like that.
Okay, well, Europe is split more or less down the middle. There's the thing called the inter-German border, so there's an East Germany and West Germany. West Germany is the bigger of the two, but there's a dividing line. Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, those countries are off in the east. They're part of the Warsaw Pact. It's a military alliance with the Soviet Union at its head. But one of the things that happened in the 1950s, and this is an Americans looking at the strategic landscape after World War II, when we become competitive with the Soviet Union, we do an analysis, a strategic analysis of what we think they have and what we have, and what will be required to eventually prevail in this conflict. And one of the things that's identified is, remember, this is pre-computer age, and so industrial production is really what everybody's all about. Everybody's economy is about industrial production. And there are 5 identified areas at the end of World War II. In the world, there are 5 major industrialized areas that produce most of the goods that are made in the world. Now, in the 1945 paradigm, those are located in these 5 places. One is in the United States. Great Britain has one. Central Europe, and this is Germany, the Ruhr area, the industrial area around the Rhine River. Japan, and then the Soviet Union has one in the Moscow to Trans-Ural Mountain area. They have an industrial base with resources, with productive facilities. So there's 5 of them. And at the end of World War II, we, the good guys, the democratic states, have 4. The Soviets have 1. So if we're looking at long-term economic competition, we thought as long as they keep 1 and we keep 4, we will do fine. One of the problems is after Vietnam, we're going to become aware of the capabilities of the Soviet Union. And one of the more dangerous capabilities is they have a large field force in Central Europe. The Soviet Union has a large troop capacity in Germany. It's highly capable, and its ability to cross ground, probably pretty fast, becomes apparent. And so the chance that the Soviets could launch an offensive operation and take 1 or 2 of these other industrial areas, in other words, the Central Germany one, and then threaten or try to take Great Britain, changes the economic equation. And so, therefore, because we have force structure in Europe, the Soviets have force structure in Europe, so in other words, those things, the infrastructure is already there. And we don't consider this the most likely course of action, but what we do is we consider it the most dangerous course of action, because if this happens, it switches the equation. And so the U.S. Army is going to begin to focus on Central Europe And some of the facts that we have to consider are from the 1973 war, the Yom Kippur War. And I'll show you a couple of images from that. Okay, this is Central Europe. Okay, the quick geography lesson. You can see the Sinai, Israel in the center there, Egypt on the left, Syria on the upper right. The quick story of the 1973 war is there have already been several Arab-Israeli wars in the Middle East. There's one in 1948, there's one in 1956, and there's one in 1967. All of those wars are very successful for the Israelis. They mop up the battlefield. They really do a really good job, to the point where they really don't believe they have any true military competition. The 1973 war is different. Between 1967 and 1973, the Israelis, banking on their successes, tried to figure out what their strong suits were. What was making their military so strong, and as long as they kept those things really good, they would have an advantage in the future. And they deduced that what they were was air power, armor, and intelligence. The ability to gather intelligence on your enemy and then use armor and aviation together in combat. So what that meant is the Israelis tended to keep those three things at relatively high readiness, but all of the other things in their military were allowed to kind of slack down. They assumed that intelligence would give them enough of a warning where they could bring the other capabilities up. So calling up reserves, bringing in more infantry, getting their artillery ready, all of those things would demand time because they weren't kept at high readiness, and they assumed that their intelligence would be able to give them a tip-off. Now what happened, just to not give anything away that you may not already know, is they were surprised. The Egyptians